The Rosenberg Affair. On June 19, 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg died in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison, New York. Their death marked the end of the most notorious political affair in America in the 1950s, and came over 2 years after their sentencing for the crime of spying for the Soviet Union.
It came in spite of some 21,000 petitions and telegrams to the White House, demanding clemency from people, organizations, and governments in North America and Europe, including Albert Einstein. It was, in a way, the climax of McCarthyism.
At the time, the American press, full of a manic fear and hatred of communists and anything that could be considered leftist, fully supported the verdict. Only one major paper, the National Guardian, saw anything wrong in the trial, anything excessive in the verdict.
The Rosenbergs were sentenced principally on the word of Ethel Rosenberg's brother David, an employee at the Atomic Research Center at Los Alamos, who admitted having handed the Russians plans of U.S. atomic weapons. He accused Julius Rosenberg of having recruited him.
But what was all the hassle about? David's A-bomb plans, handed to the Russians, were no more than a poor caricature. In the words of the bomb's inventor, a drawing unable to give any worthwhile information. Some other accusations were proved to be false, too. And throughout the trial, the Rosenbergs themselves maintained their innocence. By normal standards of justice, there was little in the affair that could justify a sentence of death.
However, there was one point. The Rosenbergs were communists, and proud of it. In the age of McCarthyism, that in itself was a heinous crime, in the eyes of a nation encouraged to believe that communism was worse than devil worship.
After the departure of Senator McCarthy from public life, McCarthyism died away and the Rosenberg affair came to represent the nation's guilty conscience. The case of two people who were unjustly put to death.
30 years later, two American historians published a book on the Rosenberg affair, and after much research, Ronald Radosh and Joyce Milton concluded that Julius Rosenberg in fact was guilty of spying, though there was no proof of anything in Ethel's case.
Ethel's only mistake was to have loved her husband, and to have sympathized with his views, neither of which is a crime, let alone a crime punishable by the death sentence in a country where freedom of speech and opinion are guaranteed by the Constitution.
Radosh's research allowed him to ascertain that Julius was indeed the head of a Russian spy ring, that he did hand over secrets to the Russians, and that these did allow the Soviets to save 3 years on their nuclear research program. But, he concluded, that being said, he did not legally deserve the electric chair, but 30 years in jail. For her part, she was executed for nothing.
Peering more deeply into the character of Julius Rosenberg, the historians portrayed him as a devoted communist, ready to sacrifice himself, his wife and his family in the name of the principles he so strongly believed in. He believed, furthermore, that Ethel would never be killed, and that one day the United States would become a socialist state. A fear that is still brandished to this day in the dystopian rhetoric of some on the right.
The legacy of McCarthyism. As for McCarthyism, following the death of Senator McCarthy, the movement rapidly declined in popularity and indeed in credibility. And by the 60s, the period was looked back on by many Americans with embarrassment. an age of witch hunts against mostly innocent people.
By the 1990s and the demise of the Soviet Union, the communist threat was completely forgotten by all in America other than some diehards on the far right, who continued to see reds under the bed in the most unlikely of situations.
Fear of communism was dropped from mainstream politics in the USA, being replaced by a fear of socialism. That is portrayed by American conservatives as representing the antithesis of American values.
Thus, in the run-up to the 2020 presidential elections, the popular candidate for the Democratic Party nomination, Bernie Sanders, lost out to Joe Biden in part because Sanders was repeatedly branded as a socialist, with Donald Trump going one step further, telling Fox News, "I think he's a communist. I mean, you know, look, I think of communism when I think of Bernie."
McCarthyism may have died out with the McCarthy generation, but its DNA is still present on the fringes of American political life. 70 years after the Rosenbergs went to the electric chair.
My dear friends, if you are satisfied with this tutorial, please help me to develop this channel, so please press the like or dislike button. It is highly important to me. Thank you. Thank you very much for your support.